Keep my business to be
Okay.
perfect. So, B'kitzur, a little bit of a change of pace. This is actually a topic that I've been meaning to cover for a long time, not specifically homosexuality per se, but the idea of morality, of Jewish morality. Why do I mention this? Well, I could have done this as a response to the Supreme Court ruling that there's a constitutional right for gay couples to get married, without commenting on the wisdom or the history of the law. You know, they ruled what they ruled for whatever reasons they did. The very idea of morality is one that, as far as we're concerned in Judaism, has one foot in logic and rationale and one foot in the inexplicable. What the Torah refers to as morality is not necessarily the mitzvot of not stealing, not killing, not committing adultery. These are all relatively understood mitzvot. Yes, they have moral value to them. Obviously, we judge societies and we judge communities based on, how, to what extent they observe the mitzvot that govern the relationships between people. This is ben adam l'chavero, as we say in Hebrew. But the Torah is, you may or may not have noticed, especially sensitive to issues of sexuality. You find this very much throughout Chumash Bereshit. We find already in Parashat Bereshit. In fact, if you go all the way back, scratch the surface on the story of Adam and Hawa in Gan Eden, you'll find out very quickly that the Rambam insinuates, and the Arizal and the Zohar seem to favor that this was very much a sexual concept, and what they were punished for, what they did wrong, and how that ended up, the crime and the punishment don't match. Why Hawa is punished with difficulty.
What do you mean, from the snake?
Meaning Adam and Hawa, the relations that they had with each other, how things developed. The Rambam says very simply, it's a very curious story, and he adds, if you think it had to do with eating a fruit, you're crazy. That he says flat out. That's the Christian interpretation. We'll see the pictures they draw of.
I have my own interpretation.
Right. Well, I mean, what's described in the Zohar and more in depth in the Arizal is very simply that the punishment must fit the crime. Midah keneged midah. Why Hawa's punishment, if she ate something, why it has to do with her difficulty in conceiving and bearing children, makes no sense whatsoever. It's impossible. The Rambam says it defies logic, it defies reason to interpret the chet as something that had to do with food or with kashrut. In other words,
Can I quickly say what I think?
Sure.
I thought, after I was thinking about it for a while, that it has to do more with your control as a human being over desire, and that because God said not to eat for this, it was just a representation. God could have said, don't do anything at all. The fact that they could not overcome their desire for something that was so beautiful or whatever in front of them or tempting had to do with the whole of all of religion. Has to do with the control of your desire above, as opposed to, following God's will.
I mean, in a very root form, this is the origin of all avirot, and this is the beginning of our relationship with Hashem, where basically, yes, it's about controlling your desires, controlling your
The physical,
appetites, right,
the
controlling your
physical,
instincts.
Yeah.
So every chet has its root over here. More particularly, in other words, what makes this especially bad, and the logic is very simple and very deep. They were given only two mitzvot, which are to procreate, that was the positive commandment, and the negative commandment was not to eat from etz hadat. Right? Allow for a very simple explanation on the part of the Arizal that da'at here is the same da'at as Wayda Adam at Hawa ishto, and Adam knew his wife and she became pregnant. And all of a sudden you're making a much deeper connection. So, controlling your desires, what it is that we find tempting, why this particular yetzer, this particular inclination or instinct is one of the more difficult ones for us to control, and it's manifest all over the place in society. And I would say especially in this generation, where every generation believes they've seen about as bad as it's ever going to get, and it keeps on getting progressively worse. I mean, we're whistling past any boundaries or limits they had ever had in previous generations. So these are very crucial discussions to have, and they're also very difficult to entertain at the same time. people come with their own ideas of morality. I'm not talking about tax law, I'm not talking about immigration reform. The idea that there are certain things that Torah finds extremely reprehensible, right? For reasons that we may or may not understand. The idea that the punishments for some of these transgressions are some of the more severe that there are in the entire Torah, and that we, and the Gemara is consistent with this, we allow ourselves to make value judgments based on the severity of the punishment. So the severity of theft, for example, compared to sexual transgressions, is not that huge. Maybe in the worst case scenario, you pay back twice what you stole, maybe 4 times or 5 times, depending on what you did with what it was that you stole. That pretty much wraps it up. Obviously, theft isn't something we condone, but it could have been punished in different ways. We don't cut hands off at the same time, so let's distinguish ourselves from the Muslims about 1,000 times over. Our perception of morality is extremely different. Incidentally, and I'll mention this too because it bears mentioning, our understanding of these laws and these mitzvot, and we'll have to discuss also the consequences of what it is that we believe and what we don't, is going to govern a lot of things. It's going to govern, first of all, how we educate, how we teach our children. Second of all, how we deal with breakdowns, how we deal with failures or with transgressions of varying degrees. It also has a very interesting influence on the bigger picture of morality. In other words, if you include this as one of the building blocks of a moral society, the way the Torah describes it, I don't care if the Supreme Court describes it, I'm talking about the Torah. What distinguishes us in our approach to this is that this is a fundamental part of our morality. Okay, in European culture, no one asks anybody else what their sexual preferences are, or in some cultures it's even considered impolite to ask somebody if they're married. Okay, fine, so people have their sensitivities. No one in Europe actually believes that what you do behind closed doors has any influence on anything in life. In fact, they couldn't care less. The way Rav Rebbe used to say, in the name of Rav Ashkenazi, is that the university, which is supposed to be the place in which you immerse yourself in learning, you immerse yourself in study, you satisfy your intellectual curiosity, you grow, you learn, you develop the ability to debate, to discuss, to negotiate, happens to be one of the most, if not the most, debaucherous institutions on the planet. Certainly this is the case in America. Historically it was the case in England. How other countries in Europe dealt with universities is a little bit different. In England, university students at Oxford and Cambridge, for example, never received the same punishments as the rest of society. They considered themselves, much like the Greeks, to be masters of society and therefore exempt from many of the laws that apply. So you had situations where, this is recorded in history, in Oxford and Cambridge, that students would go out to a pub, they would drink, and they would get into fights, so they would kill people, shoot arrows at them, and the punishments were, if there were punishments, they were much lighter than what an average citizen would get. Yeah.
Why?
In that case, they were, if you killed somebody with a half draw of a bow, it wasn't considered necessarily intent to kill. They explained their way out of it, and you killed simple peasants that nobody cared. It'd be the equivalent of killing a homeless person today. Society cares, but how much, So, the point that I'm making is that in most of these cultures, first of all, you wouldn't even ask the question, but second of all, to consider the fact that one's sexual attitudes or sexual preferences should influence any other area of life, should have any bearing on anything else that you do, is already to them something, it's almost immoral to ask the question, let's put it that way. Whereas in our culture, in our society, clearly we have expectations that, people behave and conduct themselves in a certain way. We'll talk about this whole concept of preferences, we'll talk about this idea of people's orientation, etc. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the discussion itself is almost bizarre in nature, because we live in a society where the secular influence of society pushes so hard to get their agenda across. Doesn't matter if it's gay, lesbian, transsexual, asexual, bisexual, whatever else you want to throw into the mix. There's a very, very active force, actively and passively in society.
Degenerative force.
Okay, well, pushing for the inclusion and the acceptance not only of certain behaviors that are explicitly mentioned by the Torah, but more and more over time. Okay? And classically, if you look at Facebook, for example, when you want to establish a profile, it used to be you were either a man looking for a woman looking for a man. Already by the time Facebook came into the picture, you had men looking for men, women looking for women. Today they have 32 or 34 different gender preferences.
Really?
That you could, look it up.
I trust you.
Right.
Really?
Last time I saw this was the first time I signed up. It was like, you're
It's
what, men?
well
What are
into
you
the
interested in?
30s.
Men,
You
women?
also choose which animal you like
Sorry?
You can also choose which animal you like to be with.
Really?
Oh my
Oh
god.
my god. What?
No, he's joking.
That's the.
That's the.
If you check off
he's
that
just
you're
6 months ahead of time.
No,
That's next update.
when you click that your
That's
country
next
of origin
update.
is Italy on Facebook, it opens up a whole new drop-down menu.
Next update.
The prime minister, are you the foreign minister, are you? So first of all, obviously we have an obligation to discuss, to bring these things up, to talk about them. Because this touches on relatively sensitive material, obviously we're going to conduct the discussions in a respectful way, but it's not to say that we're going to capitulate to society's expectation that we never bring these things up, that we have nothing to say about them. You'll also find, this is tragically true of, what was it, just this week? I don't know if you saw that, there was a story of a girl who grew up in a Hasidic family in Brooklyn, and she was a very prodigious computer programmer. She invented an app and a few other things. She had a patent on. She committed suicide. I think this week her sister committed suicide.
What? Why?
Yeah,
Why?
two girls from the same family.
Really?
Why?
Well, so right away people jump up and they say, you know what? It's probably because they grew up in an Orthodox family that the family was opposed to modernity. So it's not only that secular society has its preconceived notions over what's considered moral and what's not, what should be allowed, what should be condoned, what should be accepted. Here we have anatomical men using women's bathrooms. I mean, this has come up just a couple of weeks ago. The discussion itself is considered taboo and forbidden, not in Jewish culture. You'll find, in fact, we're going to see references from the Torah, from the Mishnah, from the Gemara, from the Midrashim, the Zohar, etc. There's no, it doesn't say anywhere that we shouldn't be talking about or discussing these things. You'll also find that people have prejudices against any religious institution. I would say Orthodox Judaism in general and Catholicism are probably near the top of the list, because those are two cultures that do nonetheless insist on a certain degree of sexual morality as part of their dogma. Interestingly enough, the Muslims never get accused of this because it's considered Islamophobic to even bring it up. But, Catholicism is technically what people refer to it in gender studies as a sex-negative religion, in the sense that they don't really encourage much by way of sexual. Like, if already you're going to have relations, you may as well be married, and then it's already b'di'avad. It's like not the ideal world. Because lechatchila, if this were an ideal world, we'd all be nuns and priests, and they forbid marriage for them. So in our religion and in Islam, it happens to be that it's not the case. Buddhism also has a very heavy streak of celibacy. Buddha himself left his wife and children and apparently never came back. But that's okay, because refugees do that today and they get free stuff. So basically the discussion, and it's a very important one, is that these items, these particular mitzvot, happen to be something super fundamental to who we are and what we are. And the secular influence of society has made it such that even in Orthodox circles or in Orthodox communities or Orthodox synagogues, people are very hesitant to bring these things up. It's a delicate, sensitive topic. Clearly someone coming from a secular society doesn't want to hear anything about this. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be, they want it to come up for discussion. They want made to feel uncomfortable. And yet, unfortunately, there's a reality out there that people are completely missing, which is that on the one hand, we have an obligation to discuss and to learn from these things. If it's so crucial to the Torah, as the Torah spends, literally we have hundreds of mitzvot. Okay, that's no insignificant proportion. There are mitzvot that have to do with relations of a whole variety of kinds. The obligation to procreate is obviously under the same umbrella. So if this is something so fundamental, so central to the Torah, it says an awful lot about morality in general. If the Torah makes references like these are the kinds of acts you'll see at the very beginning of the documentary. These are the acts of the Egyptians, or the acts of the Canaanites, the Canaanim. That was a very grave insult back in the day. In other words, we as a nation distinguish ourselves from them. How? Specifically through our sexual identity and what it is that we allow ourselves and don't allow ourselves to do. We'll have all kinds of discussion, before, during, and after. We might have to pause the documentary at a few points. I cannot say with 100% conviction that the guy who made this documentary is free of any agenda. Nobody today is free of any agenda. So the documentary is coming at you from I would say, noticeably left of center approach. He's not knocking orthodoxy per se. He's trying to make the case that the Orthodox community, and he himself I don't believe is especially religious, he's trying to make the case that the Orthodox community needs to recognize this. I think he would like for them to recognize and normalize it. And I see value in the
Just like the
documentaries.
Open Orthodox, right?
Right, we'll have discussions about this too. I think his point is they should recognize and normalize this segment of the population. I see value in the documentary specifically for the documentary itself. In other words, the interviews themselves, which are very informative, a little bit complicated, certainly painful. You'll see a lot of different aspects of this. But I think he was honest enough, intellectually honest enough, to include the opinions of Rabbanim that are very much interspersed throughout the documentary. There's another little outtake on the B-disc that we'll have to get. I don't think who has it, which we'll probably not do next week, but maybe the week after that. There are some fascinating stories told by the Rabbanim who appear in the documentary. I don't even know why this didn't make it into the A-disc, but there's some very, very fascinating ideas and perspectives given by rabbis from very different backgrounds. You'll see that there's one openly gay Reform, he calls himself Orthodox, let's call him Reform. There's Haredi, Lithuanian, Haredi, middle of the road, so to speak. There's some modern Orthodox rabbis. There's a social worker who lives on the Upper West Side. I actually know her. She's very sweet. She works a lot on the Shidduch crisis and talks a lot about this.
When was this documentary made?
I believe in the year 2000? 2001, yeah, something like that. So it's.
I mean, it was broadcast, like it was aired.
Well, he won quite a number of prizes for this. Obviously, and again, you have to appreciate the context. In the world of mass media and specifically entertainment, film, etc., this is about as communists get passed on the left by people like this. So they're always happy to see someone who takes on an organized religion, someone who's looking to reform conventional opinions and conventional taboos. So he won a number of prizes. In Israel, the movie was just all over the place. The Haredi community strongly condemned it. The secular community condemns everything religious, and so even this movie they didn't understand. You want to make a documentary, take real gay people, not people who think they can be religious and then oppress themselves and then be upset that they're oppressed and then repress their oppression. So, typical of Israel, there's thousands of different opinions on this. Either it's a mitzvah to watch it, it's a mitzvah not to watch it, it's a sort to do business with people who did watch it. It's.
I have a question though. What
Right.
does Judaism say about this whole concept where gay people, some gay people say, it's not a choice, it's you're born that way.
That's pretty much the crux of the discussion. I'm not going to comment on it now.
Yeah.
I'll give you a number of different opinions on it as we go through. It's not a very long documentary, but I think the discussions are as important as the information. So, why do I suggest that we do this? It really is very well done. It's a tasteful, well done documentary. Many of us, maybe do, maybe don't know up close and personal someone who's actually.
I know somebody who was
homosexual,
Orthodox, who
right.
was married, had children, and was married for 23 years, and his wife knew that he went both ways.
One of the first stories in the documentary is like that.
And then finally they got divorced after 23 years, and then he was living with somebody who was gay for a while, and for a long while, and now he just got married again to a woman. So, he's like...
Maybe she just looks like a woman.
No.
So it's hard to say. Obviously you'll see that, and of all things, the social worker, the psychologist from the Upper West Side, she's fabulous.
Is she gay?
She's Orthodox,
Yeah.
which according to the director doesn't necessarily mean that's a contradiction in terms, but she's Orthodox, she's modern Orthodox, she has a very interesting perspective on all of this. So we'll proceed with caution, meaning there's a lot of information out there. I don't want to adulterate your understanding of what's going on. I'm just giving you a little bit of background. Yes, the movie does begin with two quotes, one from the Torah, one from the Shulchan Aruch, about halacha being halacha, and then and the other thing is that all of the individuals in this movie, first of all, are real people. They all grew up in varying colors of orthodoxy. And the point of the movie was that they're struggling to reconcile their religious identity with their sexual identity. In other words, they all grew up Orthodox, want to stay that way, and then have this particular challenge, with this, and they're trying to reconcile it. So, just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through it. But let's let them do the talking because we'll certainly have what to discuss afterwards.
What, do we need to know anything about the director? Or
The director himself, I don't believe he identifies himself as religious at all. I think he considers himself someone who kind of respects the tradition, but that means a lot of things in different countries. I think it's a nice way of saying that he's not religious, but he's not anti-religious per se, just not especially pro either. Why did he pick this particular segment of the population? I think just because it made a really interesting documentary. I mean, if you go to Tel Aviv, you make a documentary about homosexuals, they look at heterosexuals like a bizarre minority that no one understands and doesn't deserve any rights. If you look in the Orthodox, the different Orthodox communities in society, what you find is actually a very interesting bifurcation. I mean, some communities are more actively tolerant, more passively tolerant, varying degrees of compassionate. Some of them seem really not to understand certain things, even though they understand the Torah's perspective. Maybe there's more to it than that. So he found a really, really interesting topic, right? In the sense that communists don't want to see a movie about communists. Maybe they want to see something different, something interesting. So the documentary is appealing to people from a variety of audiences. It's certainly contested material, and he kind of let the people do the talking. Like he doesn't push his agenda in too much. Since then, I think he's done a number of other things. I haven't really followed him as a director since then, but you'll see it's very tastefully done. The quality of the cinematography and the progression, even for a documentary, which could otherwise be very dry, is pretty interesting. I think it was well done. Sandy, something about this guy's name. Did you see the beginning of it?
Stephen Apprentice, I guess.
Yeah, but he himself does not profess to be religious in any way. That's really the most important point, because I think for him, religion was about as new as homosexuality is to people who grew up, in Orthodox communities where it wasn't really discussed much. So, you'd say, okay, I heard of a few people, I know people. I don't think he was ever very close with somebody who's very observant. So he was honest enough to let the rabbis do the talking for the religion, and to let the homosexuals do the talking for their lives and lifestyle. I mean, he doesn't interject, he doesn't intercede, he doesn't, he lets everyone represent their own opinion, which is why it was really well done. Yeah. Anyway, we're all going to hell for hitting the play button, but I wanted you to know ahead of time. So
I'll stop right
by,
now.
by